what are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
Gas prices have gone down, lumber prices have gone down, but food prices have gone high. One way or another, your dollars are going to shrink. Many of my friends that have had savings and retirements have had them dissipated, some by 50 and 60%. We are in inflationary days. Yes, they come and go, but what do we do right now? This podcast is about how to help your family beat inflation. I'm Doug Levesque from the Bible Nation Society with Pastor Jason Georges of Emmanuel Baptist Church. Pastor Jay, good to see you today.
Yeah, good to talk again. Apropos topic.
Even the church expenses increase because of inflation. I mean, tithe dollars are wonderful. People are generous and give, but those dollars are only worth so much.
Yeah, even churches can escape inflationary pressures.
Yeah.
And because everything from the cost of living to our staff.
Right.
We're in the midst of a building project.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're talking about here is the increase of building goods.
Yeah.
And that price, and that's affecting a little bit even our timing. And go now, or it's going to be more expensive later.
Right. Yeah. And so it is a consideration. It is a consideration for everyone except the government, because apparently they just raise the debt ceiling and keep on spending, and doesn't matter. They just keep on.
Their only
print more money.
Their only incentive is to keep people spending, keep it going.
No, yeah, moving forward.
Right.
What do they call that? It's the Michigan's Consumer Confidence Index.
Mm-hmm.
That's really telling, because as long as things are moving forward, as long as people have Netflix and Facebook and microwave buttered popcorn, and they're good to go.
But inflation is kind of like the truth, isn't it? When it's all said and done, they can prop up the economy. They can stimulate it. They can have us believe it's more robust to increase consumer spending,
right?
Because it's all dependent upon that. But eventually, the chickens will come home to roost.
Right.
And in economic principles, that's called inflation.
Right. Right. No.
Inflation is the
end of the line. There has to be a reset somehow.
And it's we talk about even when we talk about economic movements, the idea of the unseen hand that economists realize, like, there's factors of this. Of course, you and I know that as God,
right?
That He is the giver of rain and He's the withholder of rain. He's what makes things happen. Right. Even the productivity of man is determined by God. But inflation is kind of the economic version of the master coming home.
Oh yeah.
And finding, have you been faithful? Have you been good stewards?
Right.
Because it's time to pay the piper.
Right.
And ain't nothing free.
No, and people that have worked hard, saved money, invested, inflation comes and wipes that all away. And I think some people kind of on the other side of it say, yeah, this is a way for us to recoup some money. It's like one nation goes and invests in another nation's commodities because they can't. And then as soon as it's up and running, that nation nationalizes everything, right? And takes it all away. And that's how people feel with sometimes their retirement and things. Those dollars absolutely shrink. But what really focuses people is they go to the grocery store and the costs are skyrocketed. And so family of four used to spend maybe $400 a month, and now to do the exact same thing is double. It's $800 or more, or more. And what marketers do is they actually shrink the package, raise the price a little bit, put more air, more water inside the package, et cetera, et cetera. And so, not only is it more money, but it's less product as well, or sometimes less quality of product. And then what happens is sales of other things decrease. People drop their visions for the time being so they can eat, so they can get to work and put the gas in there, and so then that hurts the whole economy. And then it really, something has to come about to really change that. We were talking before the podcast that after the Great Depression, if it weren't for World War II and massive, printing and spending of money for the war effort, we would have still been in the dire straits of the Great Depression. And what got people spending again, was earning, and the war forced that, or allowed people to accept the government spending, unchecked, if you will, in that regard. But normally, under normal economic circumstances, right, is that bad choices, failures, national failures, whatever, bring about suffering and bring about failure and then bring about necessary adjustment. And so if we have banks failing and they're propped up, then they don't learn and they continue to do the same thing. And so you've messed up the economic cycle. If you keep, I don't think that in a situation like that, the government should bail out all the people. But if they bailed out all the people could bail out the banks with the money they got. But they don't do that. No. They bail out the banks. And so it seems insidious more and more, and that inflation isn't just a process, but it's almost a plan. But it's a fallback plan.
Even the idea of bailout, it's a false presumption. It's a prideful presumption that the government thinks it's even bigger than economies. That's not subject to the economies.
Right.
But they because economies are what? Ultimately, the actions of men, right? It's the nature of men and the movements of men and the thinking and desires of men. That's what is reflective in an economy, the needs of men, and that government can meet those needs.
Right.
Artificially.
And there's some things are too big to fail or whatever, and then the government has the power to print the money and whatever, inflate the money and then spend the money, ad infinitum. And, so we pride ourselves in America on being this free market thing. But really, when it comes to central governance and central control, that's as dark as communism, in doing that. So the rest of the world sees us kind of schizophrenic, preaching one thing, but absolutely doing something else. And it affects them. And, the path of the dollar affects their economy, even though they don't really have anything to say with it. Well, most of us are in the same boat as a third world African country. We have about as much say as where the dollar is going and how it's functioning, as a third world African country. And we're just kind of stuck. So that's kind of the core. That's kind of the nuts and bolts. That's kind of the bones of the economy and where we're at today. Obviously, COVID and the responses to it, the bad choices that led to it, the bad choices that came out of it, hurt the economy, hurt people, hurt commodities, raised prices, people lost jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, we're still recovering from that to a certain extent. The bad election, the destruction of cities in the process, this all hurt us, and we're whirling. I don't know if we're getting back to normal, whatever. But I thought today, Pastor Jay, you have 6 girls, I have 5 boys. They're all on their own. I go to the grocery store, and I'm amazed. It's just my wife and I now, so we don't have to, buy a whole lot. But I don't know how a young family.
Right.
I don't know how a young family is doing it when they have to make a house payment or a car payment and some insurance, and then pay for gas, and then pay for food, and then some medical things like that. I don't know how it absolutely works. They're stressed, and they all want to have 5 side gigs. 5 different ways of making money. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that, right? You don't work, you don't eat. But what are some things that we can help families who are struggling today, maybe even just worried, on, you and I as old guys who've been through a few things, could direct them to some biblical principles or whatever on how your family can do better in these inflationary periods. Obviously, the inflation is going to come, it's going to go, I think. And so there's going to be brighter days. I think that way. But how do I deal with it now? And let's say I'm in the brighter day. How do I insulate myself in the future? It takes a few years to kind of get to thinking that way and not just, pick that. I think my thing is, number one thing is probably remove debt. Sure. It's hard to buy a car or a house today and pay cash for that whole thing. But certainly remove indebtedness. Most people get to inflationary period and they're dying because they have a 25% interest credit card.
Right. Consumer debt.
And that could pay for that money. I mean, that could pay for that food. Right. It could pay for that gas, but they're stuck.
Right.
And then maybe there's penalties or something involved as well. And so how would you tell a young couple today or someone in that, how would you tell them to subtly remove their debt?
Yeah, don't go into debt.
Yeah, don't go there.
Yeah, don't go there. I think, when you're in marriage counseling and you got a young couple or whatnot, you remind them that the house that they're leaving took their parents 20, 25 years to put together and amass all that stuff. Day one, you're not going to have all that stuff, and yet there's going to be a bunch of marketing and opportunities for you to get all of that stuff and replicate it now and start your life off in debt.
The possibility to be a 25-year-old homeowner with multiple cars and all the toys and vacations and all that, it's possible today because of indebtedness.
Right.
But that's not the right way to go.
Right.
And once you go through a cycle of that and you go through some inflation, you realize, man, I gotta
it's just the understanding or the idea that interest and inflation are like the common. That's a grass fire. I mean, those are two potent things, and you combine those things. It's one thing to have to deal with inflation, but it's another thing you have to deal with inflation with the weight of interest around your neck, and you're trying to keep your head above water. And so, because interest is you're paying more money for no return. You don't get anything out of that. Right. So your past spending is costing you today more than even what that past spending.
Right.
Whatever
it's
you
double
bought.
jeopardy.
Yeah. So you're paying $100. You bought something for $100, and you're stringing that debt along. And by the time it's all said and done, you pay $200 for the $100 thing. It is the greatest form of inflation.
Would it be wise for someone that has assets? Maybe they have assets and they're in debt for those.
Yeah.
You know, when I say assets, I mean maybe vehicles or cars or recreational boats or whatever. To sacrifice that, sell that, either to get rid of that debt payment or to pay off debt. Maybe you own something fully and you can take the equity in that and sell it. Maybe you have some savings, which the inflation's, shrinking. Do you get a certain percentage of that savings gone to remove the debt?
Right.
That's kind of what some money gurus would say is, don't be trying to save everything when you've got this 24 interest debt while your money's shrinking.
Well, that doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't make sense. You're saving money on what you're putting a pile of money together, and yet you're drowning in interest over here. So the first step is to reduce your interest or reduce your debt, right? But then you're also talking about a little bit in there the idea of controlling your flow,
right?
Controlling your spending habits,
right?
Or what it requires for you to live every month,
right?
And that's the problem. You can have a hole in a boat, but if you're moving fast, the boat won't sink.
Right.
It's hydroplane. It's planing, right?
Money physics.
Right. But as soon as that boat slows down, now that hole gets exposed, and that's the same thing that happens with people, right? And so now they work themselves to death. They walk around exhausted, and you say, "Well, take a break." Well, I can't take a break.
Right.
My lifestyle demands that I do these things. Now, ultimately, even before their physical health, I mean, we've seen it over and over. People's spiritual health declines when they become overtaxed, or overspent, or overcommitted.
Right.
And so now they're having to make decisions. And unfortunately, the first decision that goes is they decrease their spiritual activity.
Sure.
They decrease their commitment to church and to different things like that.
Or even tithing. Like, I can't afford to tithe.
I can't afford to tithe. And really, you can't afford not to tithe.
Right.
So you're reminded that, when you're dealing with any economic principle, especially in personal economics, you ought to always remember, give heed to the one who controls all your economics. And so God told the children of Israel in the book of Haggai, you sowed, but you brought in little. You reaped, but you didn't bring in much. And he goes, it was as if you were earning wages to put them in a bag with holes.
Yeah.
And then he says, I did that.
Right.
I did that. I blew upon it. I caused the dryness. I caused the famine because I'm trying to get your attention.
Yeah.
And I don't know of a better way for most people outside of a health crisis that God gets their attention than with economic trouble.
Yeah, from that letter in the mail that says you owe this now.
Right.
And God's good, and God can turn the dime into the dollar, but God could shrink the dollar into the dime as well. And so he can do that, as he wants. And so really, it's good when you're young to learn to insulate yourself against those times that happens, because sometimes God's doing something in your nation that he really don't want to do to you, but you can insulate yourself. And the best insulator is just obedience, right? Work, earn, tithe, save in preparation, or insulate yourself, or do something in insulation. So removing debt is important. Use some of your savings or assets to do that, because that's absolutely killing you. And the Bible does say that, when you're in debt and you're not making those payments, and now you're incurring fees and fines and increased interest and all those kinds of things, now you're a slave.
Right.
I always told people when they said, well, should I buy a house and get a mortgage? And, am I becoming a slave to that? Well, in a sense, the bank owns the house until you own it. But as long as you're making payments and you're getting positive equity, you could call that an investment, right? And you have to live. Maybe the same thing with a car. Other than that, you probably should try to use cash, or, get 0%, interest on purchasing or something like that. And learn not to rely upon credit cards and interest rates on credit cards to the best of your ability.
Well, the Bible doesn't prohibit debt. It just makes us aware of what it is. And understand, it gives us a lot of wisdom about debt and going into debt, and we shouldn't go into debt because it's not wise. And so about the things that we go into debt for are not wise. Really, in American spending, going into debt for entertainment and travel, probably not wise. Right. Going in debt for sustaining your lifestyle, in other words, you're going into debt to feed your family, is probably, you have, that's a hole in the boat. Yeah. Now, there's an aspect of debt where your net worth, what you own, is more than all your debt. So you're still on the positive. But the unfortunate for many Americans is their net worth, their value, their debt exceeds their value.
Sure.
So you're underwater. Yeah. You're flipped on the side. You do that with a vehicle.
And then you're a slave if it becomes decades of that.
Now
that happens to some people, and sometimes it's of a necessity. I have one example in my life where I had 3 credit cards. They were all low interest, really good low interest credit cards. And we had $1,000 or $2,000 or maybe $3,000 on those cards. Probably more than we needed to have, but we had kids, we had family, and we had expenses, and so there was times we did that. Then my mother got deathly ill. I couldn't be there with her. I couldn't take care of her all the time. So I was using those credit cards to pay for her relatives, my uncle and aunt and grandmother. I was providing, because nobody had any means to get there and take care of her and provide even what she needed to do. So for a couple of years, I just kept charging stuff, and I had $25,000 in debt. I wish there was something else I could have done. But at the time, I just felt like I had to take care of my mom. And so I just had to incur this indebtedness. And it was tough. It was a slog, to get out of all of that. But I'm sympathetic to people, because sometimes you're just in this mode where, what are you going to do? I'm not going to not take care of my mom. And but you can make excuses in that way as well. So I think both of us would agree on lower your debt, be strategic about 0% interest or low interest and what you're going to do with your debt. And then I think secondly, lower your expenses. Yeah. Lower your expenses. And, if you sit down and spend a day or two and really thinking about it, you can get rid of subscriptions, right? Magazine subscriptions, newspaper subscriptions, media subscriptions.
Yes, digital subscriptions.
All today, yeah. You put all that together, people find out I'm spending hundreds of dollars. I'm making a car payment for subscriptions. We had the digital radio in my truck, and it wasn't that much, but I was trying to shrink, and I said, I can live without that. I can just use regular air radio or something, so I don't need that. Well, then they said, okay, can we do it for this? Can we do it for this? And it got down to like $2.95. And will you keep it for? I said, yeah, I'll keep it for $2.95, right? Well, that was even false advertising, because as soon as I went back at the $2.95 rate, it was half the channels, and it was none of the news channels. So,
which is what you wanted.
Which is what I wanted, was probably news channels and get news and weather and all kind of stuff. And so then I just did it all together. Now, there was years I was like justifying certain expenses, but we had to get frugal, and we did that. And so you have to maybe tighten your belt. The Bible doesn't use the word frugality, but it does talk about being frugal. And what about the one that Jesus is talking about parables, and he's talking about the lost person and their salvation. But if you have 100 coins and you lose one, you're going to sweep the house, and you're going to find it. And that's some frugality. I'm going to find a way to get one more jar of peanut butter out of this budget. And so what are some ways that you've had to lower expenses with you and Cindy and the girls?
Well, it really comes down to a mindset. I know in my personal life, are the theme of our family right now kind of going into the summer, you know, a little bit of our summer vision going into the rest of the year, as we're calling it way less.
Way less.
Way less in size.
Yeah, pounds.
So eat better, right?
Yeah.
Way less stuff.
Sure.
So we've just been divesting ourselves of stuff, because stuff requires energy just to have and to maintain and all that kind of things. Way less stress.
Yeah.
And so, you know, way less, and then way less cash. And I have cash with the, you know, the dollar sign looks like an S, right?
Yeah.
Like cash.
Right.
Okay. So reduce spending.
Sure.
And so just way less.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there is a flow, not a flow, an inertia, a drift that we drift. Most people drift towards spending.
Sure.
It's
and
it
is an addiction somehow.
Well, and spending is designed.
Consumerism.
The modern marketer has made spending is frictionless.
Right.
Saving is a lot of friction.
Sure.
So we gravitate to that which is frictionless.
Yeah.
You can instantly apply and get approved for a credit card at the register.
Right.
But to pay off that credit card is harder.
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea of not only savings but control your spending, your flow,
right,
and create the disciplines of weighing less, just reduction, because really it causes you to understand your true necessities.
I would say that nobody needs ice cream. Nobody needs ice cream.
My wife might disagree.
Well, I'm saying everybody wants ice cream.
Right.
When I had all the kids, we'd buy the big tub of the cheapest, yuckiest ice cream.
Because it came with a free Tupperware bowl.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
No, because you had the tub afterwards.
It was a toy, it was a Ford, it was a helmet, it was whatever you wanted it to be. And then when it became just Amy and I, well, we could buy the smaller, you know, high brand Haagen-Dazs brand or something like that. And like they were the same price. You could get this for this price, or you could get this for a price. So we weren't really tightening our belts in doing that. And now we realize we don't need ice cream. We don't. That's like the number one worst thing you could possibly eat, you know, in the world. And so I think when you, in times of inflation, you just accept that and you say we don't need to have filet mignon every night. And I remember my grandparents, and they would go to the butcher and they would get cuts of meat. And so they would get a few nice cuts, a few medium cuts, and a few low cuts, and maybe they'd get some free liver, you know, or something, and they would kind of work that out. But hamburger was a poor man's meat, and my grandparents were like, "Oh no, not hamburger." They were all my growing up years, hamburger helper, man, that was it, you know.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and now it's like, man, can we afford to get some hamburger, you know? Right. And so you have to decrease your spending, you have to change your mindset, like you said, you have to tighten your belt on things.
Yeah, and inflation is tied to spending. So, and I know you're going to go here in a second, but if I have savings and I can live off of that, or especially if my savings is not in money. Sure. So you have things, assets, or commodities, or you store it up. Your savings is in storage that you're gonna need to use. Now you're not participating in an inflation. Right. And so the less you spend, the less inflation has control over you.
So inflationary times make you do these things: remove debt and tighten your belt, and that means you're changing your mind in inflationary times, and you're going into a different way of living. Maybe in non-inflationary times, you can really isolate yourself or insulate yourself for future that. And those things, I say, are things like owning property. You're not renting for something or paying the bank or whatever, but you're getting to a place where you're owning something outright. This car is mine. The insurance is now less, right? This property is mine. The value is sunk, you know, in this dirt, and it can't really move back and forth. At least in its use to me. And from this, I can grow food. I can house animals. I can have other family members live with me, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's an insulation type thing to actually own property. And that's why, you know, the nation of Israel, you know, owning that property was a God-given thing. And that's why our founding fathers, you know, most of our law and the courts are based upon owning property, and, you know, and what that does. So I would tell people, don't just get transient with your living. Try to own something outright. Have it in your hand where it's worth it. It's a commodity. And then also, you know, the merchant who sold everything got the pearl of great price, and that was the gospel, right? That was the Lord Jesus Christ. But there's a principle there in that you have all this savings, but what's the best commodity that you need to have, right? In inflationary times like now, I mean, it might be food. Mm-hmm. It might be storage or storageable food or contact and connect of growth. And that might mean a tractor. That might mean whatever. You know, there's a different way of taking that savings and investing it in order to insulate yourself against future times where then you're going to be able to take care of your family, prioritize in order to insulate. And the other thing I said is, you're not quite there yet. Your girls are still at home. They're not launched yet. My boys are all launched. And so, you know, we don't just have now, as far as our family's concerned, one mortgage. I mean, there's 6 mortgages, and my in-laws 7 mortgages. You know, I'm going on that. But in an inflationary time, if you owned property or connected property, then you're insulating yourself against some of the things that happen. You know, when all of a sudden you got a variable rate mortgage in it, and you were paying $1,000, and it went up, and now you're paying $1,500, and you can't afford your house payment. Mm. And then you lose your house, and you lose the investment of everything that you got. That happens in inflationary times. And even rich people say rent during inflationary times. You know, don't go out and purchase that thing at the high dollar. But consolidation is an idea. And so if you can live with each other, live together, share commodities, you know, a lot of farmers will consolidate, and you have 3 or 4 farms that use one harvester. You know, because the harvester is hard to own and maintain. But if a co-op can do that, that insulates them against having to rent something or, you know, get some sort of ungodly certification, you know, to where they can do it themselves. And so the consolidation of homes and vehicles and educational skills, I think, is something in inflationary times. I'm just anticipating that these inflationary cycles are going to increase, and they're going to get worse. Mm. And so you are going to have to decide, do I go to the doctor, do I fill my tank with gas, or do I have food for the week, right? Mm. And so, you know, that's going to be a reality for everybody. Mm-hmm. So these things can help you by owning something, turning your savings to commodities and consolidating, and then there's increased earnings. Productivity, increased earnings.
Become more productive.
Innovation. You know, it used to be 30, 40 years ago, Grandma and Grandpa had one job. They worked at the shop, you know, and their whole life. Then they had a retirement or whatever. And we had it probably where we were going to have transitory 3 jobs in our life or whatever. But I think kids today, young people today, they got to have transitory jobs, and they have to have side jobs. It's going to take 5 incomes to even get anywhere near to how Grandma and Grandpa had, you know, got to live. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, what are some ways that you would think increased earning? Or Ty, what do you think some ways of increased earning?
Well, yeah, you got to become more productive. Mm-hmm. And so you got to get rid of debt. That's what's dragging you down, right? Mm-hmm. You got to control spending. Mm-hmm. That's your rate of sinking, if you're going to sink. But then you have to become more productive. And so optimally, you are producing more than you require to live, which then negates the reason to go into debt.
Right.
Now, what usually happens is as we become more, our spending outpaces our productivity. Right. So as our income, and there's probably a lot of people in our audience who go, you know what? I am making more now than I made 5 years ago, but I have more debt. Right. Because all we do is we increase our spending, our lifestyle. You know, right. Imagine if we could earn in our 40s, but live like we were in our 20s, and that kind of deal. So, but, you know, for a younger generation is to really, you know, this is one of those other Pipers. You know, we have a high school here, and we try to prepare these students for life. And you're trying to, and I got to tell you, the every generation, or it seems like successive generations, and I try not to be the whole old fogey, like, these kids, but they don't have a lot of drive. Sure. They don't have a lot of motivation.
Right. So it's an upbringing.
So they don't drive, and they don't connect that what I'm learning here academically and in school is going to be tied somewhat. It's going to be tied to my productivity later on. Mm-hmm. So there's a disconnect. I think I'm going to leave here and I'm going to get a job and I'm going to be highly productive. In other words, I'm going to be a high producer,
Right.
and yet I don't have the skills to be able to do that. And so now you go off and you realize now you're going to work that kind of job, and your economic flexibility, is very limited in what you can do in order to produce, and those kind of things. And so for especially young people, to find ways to become more productive, and whether that is learning more skills, learning a new trade, learning a better trade, or advancing your education, when it is economically logical.
Sure.
College is an economic transaction.
Right.
It's not simply life enrichment.
Right.
Now, for an aspect of it, there's a growing up process, but there's other ways to grow up. You could actually go to join the military, and they'll pay you to grow up.
Right.
So you don't have to pay to grow up.
Right.
Right. So if it's all in growing up, right?
Yeah.
We have interns with our college, in our church here. We pay our interns, not much, but we pay them a little bit. But what is that part of that? We're trying to grow them up a little bit, right? But college is always an economic decision. So if you go to college, it's not for everybody, but if you're going to go to college, is what you're studying economically viable?
Right.
My daughter is
French literature probably not.
Yeah, you're not going to. Yeah, my daughter said, "Hey, I want to go into the medical profession." She became a registered nurse.
Right.
Well, in our economy, that's a very economically viable profession.
Yeah.
With a lot of flexibility, with a lot of ability to be able to produce, for themselves and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's the consideration. Now, there's entrepreneurship. There's these different things, and of course, what a grand American privilege that Americans think to themselves all the time. I can start a company.
Right.
I can start a job.
Right.
Even the gig economy today, which is the DoorDash and the Ubers and the
Sure.
But you have. At your fingertips, you have ways to become productive.
And it's more flexible today. So you can have multiple side gigs. You can push for... And I think one thing that parents need to do is give your child a vision for themselves.
Yeah.
And if they say, I just... And it's something unrealistic. That's your job, is to give them a vision for themselves where they can take care of themselves and they can grow on that. So besides increased earnings, I had a couple other things real quick. I had natural investment. That is, God made us gardeners. And he made us shepherds, and we ought to be able to have the capacity to grow and raise some of our own food. Maybe not all of it.
Or have a good relationship with those that do.
Well, I think you have to understand how it works. Not just go to a store and you're buying a package that this is meat, but you don't really know what that is. And because that opens the door for you to barter and trade and group buy and bulk buy, when you can provide that. If you grow a bunch of wheat and then you can trade that wheat in small bundles or in big bundles, you can buy that next piece of equipment with one harvest or something like that, And so I don't think you can barter and trade and group buy and bulk buy if you don't have natural investment, if you can't increase your earnings, consolidate, put your savings to commodities, own property, prepay taxes, things like that. You're never going to get to the barter trade thing. Because if you're in debt, barter and trade's not going to solve that problem for you. Someone's going to come and take everything you got, and then you're in debtor's prison, like they used to do in England or so. But
even producing in that way, gardening, you've removed yourself from inflation. You've hedged yourself because now I can provide for my family, and we want to eat tomatoes, and we want to eat cucumbers, and we want to have some eggs, and we raise some chickens, and now I'm not stuck to whatever Walmart says those things are going to cost.
All these things we're talking about, it might take, you might say, wow, we've done it all. We're 10 years in debt or whatever. You might be 10 years in debt, but you can be 1 year away from being on a plan. And you're paying that debt, but you're living differently. And all of a sudden that 10 years turns into 5 years, and that 5 years turns into 3. So make a plan where you're going to start living in such a way that, number one, it's not reckless and you're not in danger all the time. And number two, you are insulated from these inflationary times because they're going to come stronger and faster.
Right. It ultimately comes down to your lifestyle.
Yes.
Before you're going to get out of debt, before you're going to save, before you're going to become more productive, you have to have a mind to do it. And so and that begins with the number one thing you could do right now. You could start earning. You can make your money more valuable right now by reducing your spending.
Right.
Like everyone listening to this, go find a bill to get rid of.
Right.
Just go find one.
Yeah.
If that's all you did today, you were productive.
Yeah.
Go cancel a subscription.
Yeah.
Go modify a bill. Go reduce a service.
Yeah.
Go do something. Get rid of a bill. And if you were to do that, you would, you'd be pretty good. I mean, you'd start in the right direction. It's a mindset.
Don't lose hope. Don't get dire. Some people get depressed and make really bad decisions in times like this. And so that's really why we're doing this. Not because we're trying to make you rich. We're just trying to say these inflationary periods come and go. If you change your mindset, live differently, you're insulated, you're prepared, you're not threatened, and in some cases there's greater prosperity. And God often talks about prosperity, but he's not talking about get rich quick. He's talking about this way of thinking, this way of living, etc.
Prosperity is peace.
And it's about obedience, we said to start.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to say is those of you that are doing well, like you say, I don't have that much debt, and I actually have money in the bank, and I'm own stuff, and I'm insulated. Consider at times like this what I call altruism, and that is be the entrepreneur that's starting the business not just for yourself.
Right.
Be the business that I'm going to make $1 million, but be the altruistic guy that says, you know what, I'm going to create a business that 100 people, I can hire 100 people, and I'm going to hire 100 people and teach them how to win and take care of themselves, and you're in it for influence and helping people win. That's altruism. And during times like the Great Depression and the Great Rank Falls, there's always those people that get that vision at that time that I'm insulated. So it's not a matter of I have to insulate myself, but those that are insulated are the ones that can be altruistic and say, hey, I'm going to help people win in this thing and get ahead and survive this thing. And that might be a consideration right now if you're in that place and you're in a good place. And of course, not just tithing, but lastly, there's always room for charity. Jesus said, you're going to have the poor with you always. There's always going to be inflationary cycles and economic turndowns and slave to debt and all these kinds of things. But, the widow had a couple mites, but she gave it. And so I think that even when all we have is a jar of peanut butter, then we give a spoonful of that away, and don't ever not have a charitable heart. I think Christ changes your mind and heart, doesn't make you want to get rich, makes you want to have enough to serve, have enough not to suffer, and have enough to share and be a blessing. If you're insulated to the point where you can help someone who's not saved on that particular day that's their worst day, that's opening the door of witnessing to them. And so it's important for Christian witness, Christian perspective, that these inflationary things don't defeat you and beat you and put you down with people who are beaten, defeated, but that you have some victory in that. Is there a scripture verse that has fueled you or that you've shared with your church family regarding any of these things, inflationary debt or prosperity or working hard or anything like that?
Well, we just went through the book of Proverbs on Wednesday night for over a year.
Right.
And it's repeatedly over and over, don't be the sluggard, consider the ant.
Right.
And so, laziness, those kind of things, the ant stores away what it needs for the winter. And so these are just, good Bible principles that acknowledge or lend obedience to the one who created economies.
It's free to get up and read your Bible, and that's going to make you prosperous if that's all you've got. Amen. And if nothing else, get up, get dressed, make your bed, say no to depression, give thanks to God, get some scripture, tie your shoes, and go out and do something. Get one thing accomplished, even if you don't think it's doing anything for you. Go fill out one application. Go talk to one person about a job. Go help someone in their garden. Do something that's
progress over perfection.
Progress over perfection.
Yeah. No, and listen, that's like our summer theme, our personal family. Way less, right? Way less stuff. And so we started first of all, I started in my own personal space.
Sure.
But day one of weighing less was clean off my dresser.
Right.
And just that act. It took me a little bit of time, clean it off, but that snowballs into other things. That snowballed into gut the garage. Right. Well, now gut the garage has led to, and it has a byproduct, like my girls are cleaning their rooms. Sure. Because I haven't told them to go clean their room, but they've caught the vision of,
it's kind of inventory.
Yeah, no, let's weigh less. Right. Let's just weigh less. And so, all those different things, and it, the Bible says the Lord loveth a cheerful giver. Right. And so there's this idea of generosity, in giving and realizing it's not ours, it all belongs to Him. Mm-hmm. And by being generous, first of all, being faithful with our money, and then being generous. Be obedient. Be obedient. Faithful. And then being generous with it. Really what it's the faith way of acknowledging that it's not me, it's Him.
Yes.
And
That's
so
good. And I've given away at times when I've had nothing. I've
Yeah.
given everything.
Sure.
People have come, and I went one time. I had $750 in the bank, and this person was out and out, and I went and got that $750 and I gave it away. And I mean, it wasn't easy. It was hard, but the Lord and I did that. And so then I had zero, right? But God knew that, and God sees that, and God has provided immensely more for my, not just generosity, just sacrifice, man.
Can outgive God.
Yeah, and so that's a Christian mind. And so even though we're in inflationary America, Christians can solve it by obedience, preparation, insulation, generosity, charity. So don't forget those things in inflationary periods. Now, our forefathers went through similar periods and survived and prospered and brought us the next generation. And so always remember that the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works.